Hey everyone, Cerebral Tackle back with you again here today. I'm going to share with you one of my very favorite ways to fish for rainbow trout, whether it be in a stream or a stock pond. It's always a blast and it's almost guaranteed to catch you fish. The technique? The good old trout jig and bobber. I know a lot of you have heard of it for crappie and other panfish, but do you know there's an ultralight version for trout? And when I mean ultralight, I mean super tiny. This one is so small that in fact you couldn't fish it traditionally like with a slip bobber rig you would with a jig and bobber for crappie. Why? Because these go between 1/64th of an ounce, which is not a micro but close, and then all the way down to true micros like 1/80th of an ounce to 1/100th of an ounce, even to 1/120th of an ounce jigs. Now you might ask how you even cast something that small, and it's a good question. Well, like with a crappie slip bobber, jig and bobber rig, you rely on the weight itself of the jig to pull your line through the slip bobber to your desired depth. With a trout ultralight version, you have to rely on the bobber for most of your weight. Therefore, we do not use a slip bobber when doing jig and bobber for trout. Here in my hand is one of my favorite baits to use behind it, and I'm going to show you a couple of the baits and I'm going to show you the rig. This is a Leland's Lures Trout Slayer. It's a little micro crawl, little panfish crawl pattern. And it's on a traditional 1/64th little darter Shad Leland's trout magnet head. You know, one that's similar like the crappie magnet, just 1/64th of an ounce as opposed to the 16th or larger. Now, when I said small, I even forgot a size. I think I stopped at 1/120th. Leland's also makes a trout mini magnet, 1/200th of an ounce. I'm going to try to get close enough. See that itty bitty little tiny head there? One of their famous little darter heads, just in a little micro size. Little pink bubblegum version there. This pack comes with 2 heads and a total of 8 bodies. 2 pre-rigged and 6 extra spare bodies there. Let me tell you, they will flat out catch fish. And no, I don't just use Leland baits. I've got my own little assorted hand-tied bucktails and chenille jigs as well. Let me tell you, you can throw anything on one of these trout jig and bobber rigs. One of my favorite little hand-tied patterns is one of these all kind of beige brown bad boys there. I also like an olive and brown and even like a pink silver red. Anything that'll catch a trout's eye. But this little guy here is a little 1/80th. And you can throw that behind one of these slip bobber rigs, and trust me, you can catch a ton of trout. Now, let's get to how you're going to set it up. Obviously, now that we've reviewed the weights of these jigs, like I said, the bobber is going to maintain your casting distance. It's going to be your bread and butter in getting this little guy out there. Normally, I recommend 4-pound line. With trout, I do 4 on a lot of trout. Unless I know the stream will handle 6-pound fluorocarbon, then I'll go up to that. Anyway, this is my favorite bobber to use. You can use a weighted peg bobber, such as this little guy right here, or this smaller little gentleman right here. Or you can even go with your old traditional red and white old school little plastic bobber. It gives you a little bit of weight. Now, while the weighted bobbers work well, and they also keep you absolutely vertical there in the water column, stand up where you can see that bad boy going down the stream. I like the peg bobbers, especially the little cork ones, for a reason. No, they're not as heavy weighted as the weighted clip bobbers. They won't get you out as far. However, once these have been in the water a few times and start to absorb and soak up a little bit of that water, they still maintain their buoyancy, but they add a little extra weight and they'll still get you out pretty good. Another reason I prefer a peg bobber over something like a weighted clip bobber is that you don't have that little U-wire formation that you have in the clip bobbers pinching and clipping your line down there, crimping it where it could weaken light line, especially when you're talking 2 or 4 pound, whether it be fluorocarbon or monofilament. You don't want the bobber tearing up your line. Now, if you really want to add some weight without crimping your line, I've mentioned it before, I'm going to mention them again. Go to the good old Adjust-A-Bubble. One of these little bad boys here. I think this is the mini size. Get the smallest you can. I believe it's going to be the mini. Now the line runs through it like a slip bobber, right? Once you get your desired depth marked out, you'll take the top part and twist it. Twist it a few times and it looks like that on the center. I don't know if you can see it. There's quite a bit of striations right there. It grips your line and kind of twists around your line, the surgical tubing, and gets it to where you can't pull it up and down. It will not shift on you if you have it twisted right. You can even add more weight to it because when you pull up the top here, you fill up the center cavity with a little bit of water. At that point, you can throw this thing and smack the ISS upside its freaking head. So, if casting distance is what you need when fishing a jig underneath a float for trout, you know, go with the good old Adjust-A-Bubble in the 3/16 or the mini size. First thing you want to do is figure out the depth you want to fish. You want to adjust it by the depth of the area of the stream that you're fishing and the speed in which the water is moving. If you're fishing a shallow section of stream that's moving quickly, you're going to want to give it a bit more line, like maybe almost twice the amount of the depth. That way that little jig has a chance to get kind of underneath it. You don't want the jig touching the bottom unless it's barely bumping. I mean, not getting hung, just barely bumping, moving along. That's fine. Otherwise, you want that jig suspended a few inches off the bottom. Or, unless you're fishing a really deep section of stream, you might give it a bit more length. That way you can kind of reach those suspended fish. You don't want it too far off the bottom though. Kind of use the bottom as a reference and kind of play up from there. Obviously, if you're using a spinning bubble, you want to get that bad boy on first before tying your jig, right? Should go without saying, but some people in the heat of the moment excited to try a new technique will forget. Throwing that out there. So, you have your depth figured out. You've maybe experimented with it a few times, seen that it's getting hung up, bumping the bottom too much, so you've shortened it up, whatever have you. You've got your depth. Now what you want to do now, make your cast, let it slowly drift down the river and just slowly, every once in a while, give it a twitch. Twitch. As this bait goes down the river, what you want to do is sit there when you twitch that bobber, get that jig to hop up, flutter down, hop up, flutter down. If you're using fluorocarbon line, remember, fluorocarbon line absorbs water. You're going to get a lot of drag. Fish in very pressured streams will notice when your bait is moving faster than the rest of the current, right? So you'll want to kind of mend your line. Either use a mending technique where you keep your rod above you at a high point above you at a high degree, pretty much almost at 12, okay? And lift your line up and keep your line up off the surface as you twitch it going down the river. Or you can also use a monofilament line, which will at least float a bit better than fluorocarbon. I use fluorocarbon for everything, so I'm the world's worst at that. However, I just mend my line accordingly. Sometimes you don't have to pull your line completely out of the water. You can reel down a bit, just shift it, and just kind of control the speed of that bobber as it goes down the stream. Every few feet, give it a slight twitch, let it go, slight twitch, let it go, twitch it. You just want that little, every once in a while, pop up and flutter action. Trout can't stand them. They will tear them up. I know a lot of you folks are probably looking at this, rolling your eyes saying, yeah, I've done that before. And if so, wonderful. You know the greatness of a jig and float for a trout. Those that haven't tried it, I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful, wonderful way to catch a fish. And you know, I have lost the fish of a freaking lifetime on this. The very first day I ever tried this method, in fact. True story. I was fishing a trout tournament. Trying this method for the first time, was tearing them up. I mean, I'd caught 50 to 75 fish. They were smaller. They were dinks. And like an idiot, I hadn't retied and checked my line. Then, as I'm twitching along through, that bobber goes as fast as it could in the water. So fast into the water, a steady stream of water comes squirting out of the hole where the bobber went. Not kidding you. I set the hook and the fish rolls. When this beauty rolls over, I'm not joking. The red, pink stripe down the side of this rainbow was like, 18, 20 inches long. Put a head on a tail on that freaking thing. The fish was mammoth. What do? I open up my hole and I say, first place, here I come. Snap. Line breaks. I then proceed to throw the biggest freaking temper tantrum that a guy the age I was then, I was a young adult, but yeah, it was not becoming. I think I threw my rod like a javelin and stomped around for a little while. I was young and dumb, and I just lost a fish of a lifetime. Was it frayed line? I'm positive. Did me opening up my hole and counting my chickens before they hatched, did that help? No, I jinxed the piss out of myself. What made insult to injury was a group of guys that were standing on the bank across from me. The second I started throwing my temper tantrum, they just all collectively at one time go, "Aww." If I would have had a rod long enough, I'd have knocked every freaking one of them off in the river. Anyway, I hope I explained that technique good enough for you today. It's the good old jig and float ultralight for trout. It's a wonderful, wonderful way to fish for those bad boys. I've mentioned something similar with the Lucky Lady trout worm before. That works as well with that too. But trust me, doing this method out there on the stream or in a nice little trout pond for trout will catch you a ton of fish. So please, find you some ultralight trout jigs, from the 1/8 of an ounce jigs all the way down to those mini micros there of the 1/200ths. Get them together, get you some adjusted bubbles or some cork bobbers. Find you some trout, get out there and, you know it, keep it wet.